Lewd Parabola. The six of us, my parents, my two brothers, and my sister and I, lived in a tiny house of abject squareness in Itawamba County, Mississippi, a careless little smudge of a house, butter colored with a stiff porch no one ever sat on, and a carport of dark, moody humidity, redolent of gasoline cans and the stench of cut grass. On the west side of the house was an area where my father had allowed the jungle, with its vegetable schizophrenia, to proliferate uncut, a little patch of turf where the ground was slightly lower, causing it to hold standing water year round. Here, in this tiny patch of land at absolute remove from the rest of the universe, a strange cubby or pocket had formed, cocooned in green electricities and mired in occult strangeness, burdened with the macabre sadness of the land with its implacable will, the slow, sluggish, indomitable will of a tyrant. Like a bowl of chicken soup left out in the sun for days, the water swelling the puddles, sitting for long hours in the dull heat of this place, brothed into a putrescent substance which seemed like the very liquefied marrow of matter. In this place of saturating wetness, the summer rain swelled the large puddles, and, like passengers waiting for days to board a bus in some third world country and who grow gradually more haggard and irritable, the water just sat there, boiling invisibly with vile energies, with the mute cracklings of biological proliferation like labyrinths made of filth, a soaking wet manginess, itchy with ugly smells that remained on the flesh beneath the nose like a daub of catfish putty, a place where all the funk tendencies, the wayward energies stifled in their courses, blunted in their vectors, had here found an obnoxious freedom, and in their vegetable sexuality of pistil and seed, they reek like the dead and the damned. On one of the trees of unidentifiable genus, as if it grew exclusively in this place of squalid darkness, a malformation had formed, a knot of gruesomely twisted wood, vitiated with a moss, funk and purplish with hairs which seemed engendered in grotesque follicles, a cancerous growth on the tree, it seemed, where the larval wave trains coursing through the universe had crossed up somehow and converged on this tree, making a thing gruesomely ugly, hideously and prodigiously raw and biological, as if not a disease, but disease itself had here been calcified. For a reason I didn't understand, I couldn't help looking at this growth on the tree, which was the size of a basketball and blackish purple, soft like a sponge. When I looked at it, a strange feeling of horror existed within me, and my thoughts turned to the subject of madness. I'd seen madmen in books and in the movies. Their brains, I thought, if you cracked them open, their skulls would look just like the growth on the tree, whose complex folds and revolting intricacy fascinated me with a horror which seemed strangely pleasurable in some remote way, for I couldn't help looking at this thing, this ugliness, this tumor which was identical to the brain of a lunatic, I thought, the skull of such a man being the stage of riotous backward energies and their nauseating physical manifestation, their explosion into form. Because I had a mind given to sharp examinations of myself and the world, the growth on the tree followed me throughout my day, existed along the contours of my consciousness like grime on an old can, and wouldn't leave me alone as I sat in class, its strange purple hair seeming to tickle like a feather under the nose, some region of my being both isolated and incredibly vulnerable. For the tumor on the tree brought to my attention the existence of what can only be called fault lines in the mind, seams which, if enough force is applied, will give way, will snap like a stick, and like a great dam breaking out in long black cracks and then giving way completely, sending a wash of furious deluge rampaging over town and village. So too did the mind have these mysterious linchpins which, if pulled, compromise the structure of consciousness so completely that the mind can literally break, as if it were a gadget, an electric pencil sharpener, say. The tumor on the tree applied pressure, an increasingly massive one, on just such a seam or fault line in my brain. The tumor, in a way both metaphorical and precise, followed me around, so to speak. It was a carrion dust I couldn't shake off. There are sensations of mange and desolation within, and in the peculiar, hollow, delicate organism of a child, a petri dish exists on which grow the bleakest, blackest bacterias, the Neptunian funguses born in hothouse brains, funk gorgonzolas of marvelous stink, regal, fecal. This existential odor of sorts was like a blanket oppression on my being one night when, shortly after supper, when the family was sitting mute and transfixed before the television set in the living room, a show came on, whether a comedy or a drama, I can't say which, as though pulling me towards it with a leaden force, seduced me into its dark bosom, a scene in which an attractive woman, dressed in a leotard, was teaching a dance class in front of perhaps 20 women, they too pretty and provocatively dressed. When the teacher made some movement, everyone in class mimicked her, and the scene achieved a brief, spontaneous sense of harmony within me, for I've always loved very much the sight of beautiful women in deft, rhythmic motion, alacritous dance especially, or that especially enjoyable kind of flirtation that is jaunty and physical, youthful, fruitful. Then a man with a face twisted with cruel ugliness entered the dance studio and approached the teacher. The studio went quiet. It became clear that this man had had some kind of dealings with the teacher, whose pretty face had cleared of its happy youthfulness, replaced by an innocence on the cusp of contamination, of a despoilment grafted onto the surface of eternity. "Look at me," the man said to the teacher, whose head was down tilted, suddenly tragic and remorseful. The full horror of the situation, its suddenness, the way it came out of nowhere, leaping free of the cyclonic maw of chaos into the present, injected into it like a virulent poison sweet with lewd pleasures, the kind found at the very bottom of the human brain. My eyes lingered on the woman's face, its expression, downcast, miserable, flush with the knowledge of some lie, some betrayal. Her remorse was sparklingly gorgeous in its misery, recollecting as she was some tryst with another man whose hot mouth had hissed vulgarities in her ear as he rubbed his body against hers. And then the fundamental chaos of the universe exploded on the screen, and in my mind, when to my horror the man reared back and slapped the woman, the teacher, hard 3 times, with a freak mechanical movement, with a robotic attack obdurate in its finality. To my horror, I watched as the camera angle switched to the dance students who, as their teacher continued to be slapped over and over, her head jerking hard to the left with each blow, the students, so conditioned to mimic their teacher that even in this situation they couldn't break the habit, pantomimed her as she was being beaten, each one of them standing in their spots, jerking their heads to the left, to the left, to the left. I'll stop here and make part 2.